The first thing I noticed was that the wrench in my hand cost less than the boots of the soldier standing in my doorway. That felt unfair on multiple levels, but mostly because the wrench had actually been useful today. I didn't break anything important, I said, before anyone could accuse me of it. It was a habit. In my line of work, it saved time. The soldier didn't respond. He simply stood there, tall, perfectly still, polished armor reflecting the flickering workshop lights like he had been carved out of something expensive and unnecessary. Behind him, two more figures waited, equally silent, equally intimidating, and equally uninterested in my attempt at humor. Good, I added, wiping my hands on a cloth that had given up on being clean years ago. Because if this is about the coolant pipe on Dock 3, that explosion was more of a suggestion than a failure. Still nothing. That's when I realized this was not about Dock 3. They stepped aside without a word, revealing a fourth figure behind them. This one didn't wear armor. Instead, they carried a small device, sleek, smooth, and glowing faintly with a soft blue light. The kind of technology that didn't belong anywhere near my workshop, which smelled faintly of burnt circuits and regret. The device hummed once, and then a voice, perfectly neutral, perfectly clear, spoke. Identification confirmed. I blinked. That sounds official. I don't like it. The figure holding the device tilted it slightly, as if adjusting its angle would somehow make me more cooperative. You are required, the voice continued, to accompany us. Required, I repeated. That's a strong word. I prefer invited. Invitations usually come with food. One of the soldiers shifted, just slightly. I took that as encouragement. Also, I added, gesturing vaguely around my workshop, I'm kind of in the middle of something. This was technically true. The something in question was a half-disassembled engine core that had refused to cooperate for 3 days straight. At this point, I was considering negotiating with it, which in my experience was only slightly less effective than hitting it. The device hummed again. Your presence is necessary for a matter of critical importance. I looked at the engine. It did not look offended that I might abandon it. Well, I sighed, that sounds worse than unpaid rent. I set the wrench down carefully as if it might take this personally. It had been with me longer than most people. Do I get to know what this is about? I asked. Or is this one of those mysterious, you'll find out later situations? The soldiers turned, already moving toward the exit. Apparently, that was my answer. Right, I muttered, grabbing my jacket. Love those. The corridor outside felt colder than usual. Not physically. Station temperature controls were annoyingly precise, but in a way that made the back of my neck itch. People moved out of the way as we passed, eyes following the soldiers, then briefly flicking toward me with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something like pity. That was new. Just so we're clear, I said as we walked, I'm not important enough for this kind of attention. You might have the wrong mechanic. There's another guy 2 levels down who once fixed a reactor using a spoon. Very impressive, terrible personality. No response. I sighed. You're all very committed to the silence thing, aren't you? We reached the docking bay faster than I expected. The doors slid open, revealing something that did not belong anywhere near a place like this. The ship waiting inside was wrong. Not broken, not damaged. Just wrong in a way that made my brain hesitate, like it couldn't quite decide how to process what it was seeing. Its surface seemed smooth, but not in a way that suggested solid material. Light moved across it strangely, bending just enough to make it feel alive. I stopped walking. Okay, I said slowly, that's not a ship you bring a simple mechanic to. The soldiers did not stop. Seriously, I continued, pointing at it as if they might have missed the problem. That thing looks like it costs more than this entire station, possibly including the people. One of them gestured toward the ramp. Right, I said. Of course. Get on the terrifying, probably haunted, extremely expensive ship. Very normal request. I took a step forward, then paused. If I die, I added, I want it officially recorded that I had concerns. Still no reaction. Unbelievable. The interior was worse. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Not physically, not like a vibration or a sound, but something deeper. The air itself seemed uncertain. Systems flickered in ways that didn't match any malfunction I had ever seen. Panels glowed, dimmed, then corrected themselves as if second-guessing their own existence. I frowned. Okay, I murmured, almost to myself now. That's new. A corridor stretched ahead, shifting subtly as I looked at it, like it couldn't quite decide on a final shape. Doors opened before we reached them, then hesitated, then opened again. I couldn't help it. Is it just me, I said, or is this ship confused? No one answered. But as we moved deeper inside, I felt it more clearly. This wasn't just a machine that was broken. This was a machine that didn't agree with itself. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that made me smile just a little. All right, I whispered under my breath. Now I'm interested. The deeper we went, the less the ship behaved like something that wanted to be understood. I've worked on broken machines my entire life. Burnt circuits, collapsed engines, systems that scream their problems at you the moment you touch them. Those made sense. Even the worst disasters had a kind of honesty. Something failed, something stopped, something refused. This ship hesitated. A panel on the wall lit up as we passed, displaying a cascade of symbols I couldn't read. Then it flickered, replaced itself with something simpler. Basic diagnostics, almost as if it had reconsidered who it was talking to, before going dark entirely. I stopped walking. Did you see that? I asked, pointing at the now innocent panel. No answer. I sighed. Of course not. Why would the terrifying silent escorts notice the haunted wall trying to communicate with me? One of the soldiers slowed slightly, turning their helmet just enough to suggest awareness. I took that as progress. Look, I continued, gesturing around us. I'm not saying your ship is possessed, but if it starts whispering, I'm leaving. The corridor curved ahead, though I was fairly certain it hadn't been curved a moment ago. The floor beneath my boots felt solid, but there was a strange delay to each step, like the surface needed a fraction of a second to remember it was supposed to support me. That's not reassuring, I muttered. We passed a doorway that opened before we reached it, revealing a room filled with engineers, or at least beings who clearly had the posture of people who had not slept properly in a while. Their equipment was advanced, far beyond anything I'd ever touched, yet their expressions all shared the same thing: frustration. One of them looked up as I passed. Then they frowned. Then they looked at the soldiers escorting me. Then they frowned more. Ah, I said, offering a small wave. I assume you've all tried turning it off and on again? No one laughed. Rough crowd, I added under my breath. We didn't stop. The door closed behind us, but not immediately. It lingered, half open, as if reconsidering whether it should have revealed that room at all. That hesitation again. I tilted my head slightly. You see that, right? The door did that thing again. Still nothing. I exhaled slowly. Okay, new rule. I'm going to keep talking, and you're going to keep ignoring me. Let's see which one of us breaks first. We reached what I assumed was the central section of the ship, though center felt like a suggestion rather than a fact. The architecture here shifted more noticeably. Lines that should have been straight curved gently when I wasn't looking directly at them. Light sources dimmed and brightened in uneven rhythms, like the ship was breathing, but forgetting how. And then we entered the core chamber. I didn't realize I had stopped walking until one of the soldiers nearly walked into me. The space was enormous, but not in the way ships usually were. There was no clear structure, no obvious machinery. Instead, a vast suspended structure floated at the center. Layers of interlocking components that seemed to rearrange themselves slowly, like a puzzle that couldn't decide on its final image. Energy moved through it in thin streams of light, but those streams flickered, splitting, rejoining, contradicting each other in ways that made my head hurt if I stared too long. I let out a low whistle. Okay, I said softly, that's definitely above my pay grade. One of the soldiers stepped forward and stopped near the edge of the chamber. I followed cautiously, my eyes still locked on the shifting structure. This isn't broken, I murmured. Not exactly. For the first time, the device spoke again. Clarify. I glanced at it. I mean, something's wrong, sure, but it's not failing in the normal way. It's, I gestured vaguely at the core. Arguing. The word hung in the air for a moment. I scratched the back of my neck. I know how that sounds. I took a few steps closer to the edge, ignoring the subtle shift in posture from the soldiers behind me. Look at it, I continued. Those energy paths, they're not just unstable, they're conflicting. One system pushes this way, another pulls back. It's not a malfunction. It's, disagreement. I paused, then added, which, to be fair, is still a terrible way to run a ship. The core flickered again, brighter this time, as if reacting to the observation. One of the energy streams stabilized briefly, holding its path longer than before collapsing back into chaos. I blinked. Did it just listen to me? Silence. I smiled slightly. Okay, now that's interesting. I stepped even closer, ignoring the way the air seemed to resist me just slightly, like walking into a memory that hadn't fully formed yet. All right, I said, folding my arms as I studied the shifting structure. Let's try something. I cleared my throat. Hey, I said, addressing the core directly. I don't know what's going on with you, but you're doing a terrible job of it. Behind me, one of the soldiers shifted sharply. Relax, I added over my shoulder. If it gets offended, we'll apologize. I turned back to the core. Try this, I continued, speaking more slowly now. Pick one direction, any direction. Just commit to it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, very faintly, one of the energy streams held steady. Just for a second. Then two. Then it flickered out again. But it had tried. I let out a quiet laugh. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. I glanced back at the soldiers, grinning despite myself. Your ship doesn't need a mechanic, I said. It needs a mediator. The core pulsed again, softer this time. And for the first time since I had stepped aboard, it didn't feel entirely hostile, just uncertain. I nodded slowly, my curiosity now fully awake. All right, I murmured. Let's figure out what you're arguing about. I was still staring at the core when I felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just the quiet, unmistakable sensation that I was no longer the most interesting thing in the room. I turned. She wasn't there a moment ago. I was sure of it. Now she stood a few steps behind the soldiers, completely still, as if she had always belonged to that exact point in space, and we were the ones intruding. At first glance, she looked human. Calm posture, composed expression, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself to be noticed. But then my eyes adjusted, and the differences became impossible to ignore. Her ears, long and elegantly shaped, framed her face like a subtle defiance of familiarity. Not exaggerated, not alien in a grotesque way, just precise, intentional. Her gaze was fixed on me, not on the core, not on the soldiers. Me. I blinked once, then twice. Okay, I said quietly. So that's new. The soldiers stepped aside without being told. That alone told me everything I needed to know about who she was. Right, of course. Because when you accidentally start talking to a possibly sentient ship, the Queen shows up. Perfect timing. I straightened slightly, brushing invisible dust off my jacket like that might improve the situation. You're going to tell me I'm doing it wrong, I said, gesturing toward the core. And I'm going to pretend I wasn't just insulting your ship 5 seconds ago. She didn't respond immediately. She studied me. That was worse. I was used to people reacting. Annoyance, confusion, occasionally laughter if I was lucky. But this quiet, measured observation felt like being taken apart and reassembled without any tools. Finally, she spoke. You are not doing it wrong. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried just enough weight to make the entire chamber feel like it was listening. I nodded slowly. That's surprisingly encouraging. A faint shift in her expression. Not quite a smile, not quite anything else. I am told, she continued, that you believe the ship is arguing. I winced slightly. Yeah, that sounded smarter in my head. It is an unusual conclusion. Unusual is kind of my specialty. I gestured toward the core again, which pulsed faintly, almost as if aware of being discussed. It's not broken in a normal way, I explained. Nothing's failing completely. It's more like two systems trying to be in charge at the same time. Every decision cancels itself out. She took a few steps closer, her attention shifting briefly to the core, then back to me. And you believe it can be resolved by speaking to it? I shrugged. I've seen worse strategies. Silence. Then without warning, she stepped past me, closer to the edge of the chamber than anyone else had dared to go so far. The light from the core reflected softly against her features, emphasizing the calm focus in her eyes. You addressed it, she said, almost thoughtfully. Not as a machine, but as something capable of response. I rubbed the back of my neck. Well, yeah. I mean, if it's acting like it has opinions, might as well treat it like it does. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at me again. And it responded. I hesitated. A little. The core flickered again, as if to prove the point. We both watched it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I cleared my throat. So, I said, gesturing vaguely between her and the massive, existentially confused machine, I'm guessing this is where you tell me how many people much smarter than me have already tried everything. Her gaze didn't waver. Many. Great, I muttered. Love being the last resort, always a good sign. A brief pause, then, they attempted to control it. I blinked. Yeah, that tracks. They attempted to isolate the fault, to remove it. Also tracks. Her eyes shifted slightly, narrowing, not in anger, but in consideration. They did not attempt to understand it. I smiled just a little. Yeah, well, most people don't talk to their problems. They hit them. I paused, then added, to be fair, I've tried that too. Mixed results. Something changed in her expression again, subtle but real. The smallest flicker of something that might have been amusement. I decided not to point it out. Didn't want to ruin the moment. Instead, I stepped forward again, returning my attention to the core. All right, I said, exhaling slowly. Let's try this properly. I placed a hand on one of the nearby panels. It was warm, but not in a way that suggested overheating. More like awareness. Hey, I said, quieter this time. I know you're trying to do two things at once. You don't have to. The energy stream shifted slightly, just enough to be noticeable. I glanced back at her. See that? Her eyes followed the movement, sharp and focused. I see it. Good, Miwan, I said, because if I'm imagining this, I'm going to need a completely different explanation for why I'm talking to a wall. She didn't respond to that, but she didn't dismiss it either, and for some reason that mattered. I looked back at the core, my curiosity now fully replacing whatever hesitation I had left. All right, I murmured, more to the ship than to anyone else. Let's take this one step at a time. Behind me, I could feel her presence, steady, watchful, no longer distant. Not just observing the ship, observing me. And for the first time since I had been dragged onto this impossible vessel, I had the distinct feeling that fixing it might not be the only thing that mattered anymore. I didn't realize how long I had been standing there until my legs reminded me they were not, in fact, designed for philosophical negotiations with a starship. All right, I muttered, shifting my weight slightly. New plan. We sit down and have a calm, reasonable discussion with the machine. I glanced around. There were no chairs. Of course there aren't, I sighed. Why would the most advanced ship in existence include something as primitive as sitting? Behind me, I heard the faintest movement. I turned my head just enough to see her still watching, her expression unreadable, though there was something quieter in it now. Less distant. Do you ever sit? I asked her. She blinked once, clearly not expecting the question. Yes. Where? A pause. Not here, I nodded. That explains a lot. I turned back to the core, folding my arms again, studying the shifting energy streams more carefully this time. The pattern was still unstable, but now that I'd seen it react, I couldn't unsee the rhythm beneath the chaos. It wasn't random, it just didn't agree with itself. Okay, I said slowly, thinking out loud. You're not broken. You're undecided. One stream surged forward, brightening briefly before being pulled back by another. Yeah, I continued, pointing at it. That, exactly that. I crouched down near the panel, ignoring the way the surface subtly adjusted beneath me. like it was unsure how to support someone doing something so unnecessary. You've got two command structures running at the same time, I said. Or two priorities. Or two personalities. I paused. Then I tilted my head. And you don't happen to have a split consciousness, do you? The core pulsed. Not aggressively, not defensively, just in acknowledgement. I leaned back slightly. Oh, that's not good. Behind me, one of the soldiers shifted, but I ignored it. Okay, I continued, rubbing my face. That's actually worse than broken. Broken is easy. Broken just sits there and lets you fix it. I gestured toward the core. This is a debate. I looked over my shoulder at her. Do you know how hard it is to fix a debate? She stepped a little closer, her voice calm. Explain. I let out a short breath. You can't force a solution. If you pick one side and suppress the other, it'll just fight back. You'll get instability, resistance, system conflicts. I tapped the panel lightly. You have to get both sides to agree. A pause, then I added, which is why I don't work with people. Silence, I smiled faintly. Machines are usually less stubborn. The core flickered again, one stream stabilizing for a moment longer than before. I noticed it immediately. All right, I said, sitting up straighter. You're listening again. That's good. I shifted closer, lowering my voice slightly, as if that somehow made the interaction more private. Let's try something else, I murmured. Instead of choosing one over the other, what if you don't have to? The energy streams hesitated. Actually hesitated. I felt it, like the entire system had paused mid-thought. I glanced back at her again. She hadn't moved, but her attention had sharpened, focused entirely on the core now. See that? I whispered. I see it. Her voice was quieter this time. I nodded, then turned back to the panel. All right, I said, thinking carefully. You're trying to resolve a conflict by eliminating one side. That's the problem. You don't need to eliminate anything. You need to align. I winced slightly. That sounded smarter than I feel right now. I adjusted a few controls on the panel, not forcing anything, just nudging inputs, easing pressure points where the systems clashed the hardest. The reaction was immediate, not dramatic, but real. The energy streams didn't stabilize completely, but they stopped fighting as violently. The flickering softened, the contradictions less sharp. I blinked. Okay. I tried another small adjustment, slower this time. The core responded again. A little more stability, a little less resistance. I let out a quiet laugh. Are you serious? I looked back at her, unable to hide the grin now. I think it likes compromise. Her expression didn't change much, but there was something in her eyes now, something warmer, more engaged. You are not forcing it, she said. Yeah, I replied, turning back to the controls. Turns out yelling at a confused system doesn't make it less confused. I paused, then added, who would have guessed? Another small adjustment, another response. This time, one of the energy streams held steady for several seconds before wavering again. Not perfect, but better. I leaned back slightly, exhaling. Okay, I said, more to myself than anyone else. This is working, slowly, painfully, but working. I glanced around the chamber, then back at the core. You're not unrepairable, I murmured. You're just complicated. The core pulsed again, softer this time, almost calmer. Behind me, I could feel her presence shift slightly, closer now than before. Not just observing, understanding. I wiped my hands on my jacket, then looked back at the panel. All right, I said quietly, let's keep going. Because for the first time since I had stepped onto this impossible ship, the chaos wasn't overwhelming. It was listening. I didn't trust it. That was the problem. Not the ship, not the core, not even the strange, almost cooperative behavior it had started to show. Those things I could work with. Those things made a kind of sense now. What I didn't trust was how easy it suddenly felt. All right, I said slowly, staring at the panel. This is the part where something goes horribly wrong. Behind me, I heard the faintest shift of movement. You anticipate failure, she said. I shook my head. No, I expect balance. If something starts going too smoothly, it's usually because it's building up to ruin my day later. I tapped the panel lightly, watching the energy streams. They were still unstable, but not violently so anymore. The chaotic flickering had softened into something closer to disagreement than conflict. Progress. Suspicious progress. I've seen this before, I continued. Not like this, obviously. Less glowing existential crisis, more broken engines. But the pattern's the same. You fix one thing, and suddenly 3 other things remember they're also broken. The core pulsed, almost as if it took mild offense. I pointed at it. Don't look at me like that. You know it's true. There was a pause, then one of the streams flickered sharply, just for a second, before settling again. I raised an eyebrow. Okay, that felt personal. Behind me, I heard something new, a quiet sound, soft, brief. I turned my head slightly. She wasn't smiling, but she was close, very close, and I was fairly certain that had been the smallest, most controlled hint of amusement I had ever witnessed. I blinked once, then quickly turned back to the panel. All right, I muttered. Now I'm definitely in trouble. I leaned in again, focusing. Let's test something, I said. If you're stabilizing, then the conflict isn't gone. It's just quieter. I adjusted a control, not enough to force anything, just enough to introduce a slight imbalance. The reaction was immediate. The streams flared, pulling away from each other again, sharper this time, more defined. I nodded slowly. Yeah, there you are. I glanced back at her. That's the problem, I said. It's not one system fighting another. It's 2 complete sets of logic trying to run the same structure. Her gaze didn't waver. 2 control authorities. Exactly. I leaned back, exhaling. And neither one is willing to give up control completely. I tapped the panel again, softer this time. So when I push one, the other resists. When I ease them, they calm down. But the conflict is still there. The core pulsed again, the energy streams shifting in a slow, uneasy rhythm. Not chaos, not harmony, something in between. I frowned slightly. Okay, I murmured. So forcing alignment won't work long term. Silence. Then she spoke. What will? I hesitated. That was the part I hadn't figured out yet. I scratched the back of my neck, glancing between the panel and the core. Well, I said slowly, if 2 systems can't agree on control, then maybe neither of them should have it. A pause. That is not a typical solution. Yeah, I replied. I've noticed that typical hasn't been working so far. I stepped back from the panel, thinking. If both sides are trying to lead, they'll always clash. But if they're given separate roles, if neither one is overriding the other, I trailed off. The idea was forming, but it felt risky, very risky. I glanced at the core again. You'd have to split the decision-making process. The energy streams flickered slightly as if reacting to the concept. I pointed at it again. Don't get excited. I'm not done thinking. Behind me, she took another step closer. You would divide the system. Not divide, I corrected. Reorganize. I gestured toward the shifting structure. Right now, both sides are trying to do everything. Navigation, power distribution, structural control. Everything overlaps. That's why they conflict. I paused, then added, it's like having 2 pilots fighting over the same controls. No matter how skilled they are, the ship's going to shake itself apart. The core pulsed again, softer this time. I watched it carefully. So, I continued, instead of making one side win, you give them different responsibilities. Silence. Then she asked, and they will accept this? I shrugged. No idea. I paused, then added, but they're already tired of fighting. You can see it in the way the system hesitates. It's not just conflict, it's exhaustion. The word lingered. The core's glow dimmed slightly, then steadied. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I murmured. That's it. I stepped forward again, placing my hand on the panel. All right, I said quietly. Let's try something new. I began adjusting the inputs, not forcing alignment this time, but separating pathways, redefining how commands flowed through the system. It was delicate work, more about guiding than controlling. The response was immediate. The streams didn't clash. They shifted, separated slightly, still connected, but no longer directly opposing each other. I held my breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one stream stabilized. Not completely, but enough. I blinked. Okay. I made another small adjustment. The second stream steadied as well, though it still wavered at the edges. Not perfect, but closer. I let out a quiet laugh. You're both stubborn, I muttered, but not impossible. Behind me, I could feel her watching, her presence steady and focused. Continue, she said. I nodded. Yeah, I replied softly. I plan to. Because for the first time, this didn't feel like a problem I had to solve. It felt like something I had to guide. And somehow that was a lot more complicated. I knew it was going too well, not in a dramatic, everything explodes kind of way. That would have been easier to deal with. No, this was worse. The quiet kind of wrong, the kind that hides just beneath progress and waits for you to relax. All right, I said under my breath, watching the streams hold their separate paths. What are you planning? The core didn't answer. It just continued, which somehow was even more suspicious. I adjusted another pathway, carefully isolating a section of control logic, guiding one stream towards structural regulation while the other leaned into energy distribution. It wasn't perfect, but it was cleaner. Less overlap, less friction. For a moment, just a moment, it worked beautifully. The entire chamber seemed to breathe with it. The flickering light smoothed into a steady glow, the subtle distortions in the walls easing as if the ship itself had finally remembered how to exist properly. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. That's either very good or very bad. Behind me, her voice came, calm as ever. You are uncertain. Always, I replied. Certainty is usually a trap. I leaned closer to the panel, narrowing my focus. Let's push it a little, I murmured. I made one more adjustment, just a small one, barely a nudge. And that's when everything shifted. Not violently, not immediately, but enough. The two streams, now separated, didn't clash, but they didn't cooperate either. They drifted apart, further than I intended, their synchronization slipping. The steady rhythm broke, replaced by a subtle delay between actions. The ship hesitated. Not like before. This time it felt empty. I froze. Oh, I whispered. That's not good. The lights dimmed, not flickering, not unstable, just less present. The panel beneath my hand felt colder. I turned slightly, glancing at her. I think I went too far. She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the core. What is happening? I swallowed. They're not fighting anymore, I said, but they're not working together either. The streams pulsed faintly, out of sync now, each following its own rhythm. It's like, I searched for the right words. Like I separated them, but didn't give them a reason to stay connected. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. Great. I fixed the argument and created a breakup. Behind me, one of the soldiers shifted again. I ignored it. I leaned back toward the panel, scanning the readouts. Okay, I muttered. Don't panic. This is fixable. Probably. The system lagged slightly as I accessed deeper layers, slower than before, like it wasn't fully committed to responding. Yeah, I said quietly. They've pulled away from each other too much. I glanced back at her. They need a shared purpose. She studied me. Explain. I gestured toward the core. Right now, they're independent. No conflict, but no coordination either. If they don't have something that requires both of them, they'll just drift. The streams flickered faintly, as if proving the point. I frowned. Machines aren't supposed to drift, I added. That's unsettling. I turned back to the panel, thinking fast. All right, I said, more focused now. If separation stops the conflict but causes disconnection, then we need something in between. I hesitated, then my eyes narrowed slightly. A shared constraint? The words came slowly, but once they did, they felt right. I adjusted the system again, this time not separating or aligning, but linking. Not fully merging the streams, just introducing a point where both had to interact. A single process that neither could complete alone. The reaction was immediate. The streams hesitated. Then, they adjusted, not clashing, not pulling apart, but synchronizing. Slightly, just enough. I leaned in closer, barely breathing. "Yeah," I whispered. "That's it." The light in the chamber shifted again, brighter this time, more stable. The subtle distortions in the walls eased further, the structure of the room settling into something consistent. Not perfect, but real. I let out a quiet laugh, relief slipping through despite myself. "Okay," I said. "Now we're getting somewhere." Behind me, I heard her step closer again. Not cautious this time, curious. "You have created cooperation." I shook my head slightly. "No, I gave them a reason to cooperate." I paused, then added, "Big difference." The core pulsed again, steady this time. The two streams moving in a shared rhythm. Not identical, but connected. I watched it carefully. "Still fragile," I murmured. "If one side pulls too hard, it'll break again." She stood beside me now, close enough that I could feel the quiet presence of her attention. "And if it stabilizes?" I glanced at her, just briefly. "Then," I said, "you've got the most complicated ship in existence, finally agreeing with itself." I looked back at the core. "And I get to go back to fixing engines that only explode in predictable ways." A pause, then I added, "Honestly, I'm starting to miss those." The core pulsed again, soft and steady. Not confused, not fighting, not drifting, listening. And for the first time, I wasn't just guiding it. I was part of the conversation. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. Not the kind filled with flickers and hesitation and quiet mechanical arguments. This was different. This was steady. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the core, waiting for it to prove me wrong, waiting for the flicker, the delay, the subtle contradiction that had defined it since I first stepped onto the ship. Nothing happened. The two streams moved together, not perfectly aligned, not identical, but aware of each other, each motion completed by the other, each action acknowledged before it began. I exhaled slowly. "Well," I said, "that's new." The panel beneath my hand felt warm now, not uncertain, not hesitant, just present. Behind me, I could feel her standing there, closer than ever, but not watching with that distant, measuring gaze anymore. There was something else now, understanding. "Is it stable?" she asked. I tilted my head slightly, studying the system one last time. "Stable enough," I replied. "It's not going to fall apart, not unless something forces it to." I paused, then added, "Which I strongly recommend you don't do." A brief silence, then quietly, "It listens to you." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I noticed." I stepped back from the panel, wiping my hands out of habit more than necessity. "I think it just needed someone to stop trying to control it," I said. "Turns out forcing everything into one perfect system isn't always the best idea." I glanced at her. "No offense. None taken." Her voice was calm but softer now, less like a command, more like a response. I nodded once, then turned back toward the core. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then, "Hey," I muttered quietly. "Try not to start arguing again, all right?" The core pulsed once. Steady. I chuckled under my breath. "I'm taking that as agreement." I stepped away fully this time, giving the system space, though it no longer felt like something that needed to be handled carefully. It felt settled, like it had finally decided what it wanted to be. Behind me, the chamber doors opened without hesitation. Clean, immediate, no second thoughts. I noticed. "Wow," I said, glancing at them. "That's the most confident door I've seen all day." Silence, then, "I suppose," I added, "that's a low bar." I turned back toward her, suddenly aware that this part, this moment, was the one I hadn't planned for. "Well," I said, rubbing the back of my neck, "I guess that's it." She didn't respond immediately. She stepped closer instead, stopping just in front of me. Not distant, not formal, close. You have done what others could not. I shrugged lightly. I talked to it. That's not exactly a revolutionary technique. It is, she said, when no one else considers it. I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped. For once, I didn't have a joke ready. That felt unusual. I shifted slightly, glancing away for a moment before meeting her gaze again. So, I said, trying to regain some sense of normalcy, what happens now? You send me back, pretend this never happened, and I go back to arguing with engines that don't listen? Her expression didn't change much, but her answer did. You could. I blinked. That sounds like there's another option. There is. A pause, then, you could stay. The words hung there, simple and direct, but heavier than anything else she had said. I let out a quiet breath. Stay, I repeated, not as a question, just to hear it. This ship, she continued, glancing briefly toward the core, will require understanding, not control. I followed her gaze. Yeah, I said softly. I figured that. And she paused just slightly, would prefer someone who sees it as you do. I looked at her again, really looked this time, not as a queen, not as someone I had to impress or avoid offending, just as her. You're asking a lot from a simple mechanic, I said, a faint shift in her expression. You are not simple. I smiled slightly. That's going to be a problem for my reputation. Silence settled between us again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was open. I glanced back at the core one last time, then at the doors, then back at her. All right, I said quietly. Her gaze sharpened just slightly. All right? I nodded once. Yeah, I said. I'll stay. I paused, then added, someone has to make sure your ship doesn't start debating itself again. A flicker of something in her eyes, warmer this time, unmistakable now. Then you will remain. I let out a small breath, something between a laugh and something else I couldn't quite name. Guess I'm not going back to my workshop anytime soon. I glanced around the chamber, at the steady light, the stable structure, the impossible machine that no longer felt impossible. Probably for the best, I added. The ship pulsed softly, not uncertain, not confused, just present. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fixing something broken. I felt like I was part of something that had finally